The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains as Wyatt Blackwell dove behind an overturned wagon, his breath coming in short gasps. Blood seeped through his shirt where the bullet had grazed his shoulder, but he had no time to tend to it, not with the Harmon gang closing in. Montana Territory, 1876, was no place for a man alone, especially one with a price on his head for a crime he didn't commit. "You can't hide forever, Blackwell," Jed Harmon's voice carried on the wind. "We know you're hit." Wyatt checked his Colt, 2 bullets left, not enough to take on 5 men. His horse was gone, spooked by the gunfire, and the nearest town was 10 miles away. Sweat trickled down his face as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. He'd need a miracle to survive this day. That miracle arrived in a cloud of dust from the east, a wagon approaching at high speed, driven by a figure in a wide-brimmed hat. The Harmon gang turned their attention to the newcomer, giving Wyatt precious seconds to plan his next move. The wagon came to a halt about 50 yards away. To Wyatt's astonishment, a woman jumped down, a Winchester rifle in her hands. She fired 3 rapid shots over the heads of the Harmon gang, sending them scrambling for cover. "This doesn't concern you, lady," Jed shouted. "We got business with that man." 5 against 1 wounded man hardly seems like business, she called back, her voice clear and determined. "More like murder. I suggest you boys ride on before the territorial marshal gets wind of this. He's due through these parts today." Wyatt couldn't believe what he was witnessing. The woman stood her ground, rifle steady in her hands, facing down 5 of the most notorious outlaws in the territory. After a tense standoff, Jed signaled to his men and they slowly backed away. "This ain't over, Blackwell," Jed called out. "We'll be seeing you real soon." Once the gang had ridden off, Wyatt cautiously emerged from behind the wagon. The woman approached, rifle still ready but no longer aimed at anything in particular. As she came closer, he saw she was young, perhaps 25, with striking features partially hidden beneath her hat. "You're bleeding," she said matter-of-factly, nodding toward his shoulder. "It's nothing," Wyatt replied, though the pain was growing more intense by the minute. "Why did you help me? Looked like you needed it." She extended her hand. "Faith Valentine. I run the general store in Cottonwood Creek. Wyatt Blackwell." He shook her hand, then winced as the movement sent fresh pain through his shoulder. "I appreciate the help, Miss Valentine, but you shouldn't have gotten involved. The Harmon gang doesn't forget a slight." Faith gestured toward her wagon. "Let's get that shoulder tended to. My wagon's stocked with supplies and Cottonwood's not far. You can rest there until you're healed." Wyatt hesitated. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Faith replied, already walking back to her wagon. "It's common decency. Besides, I could use some help unloading goods at my store. Consider it payment for the medical supplies." Wyatt knew he had little choice. Without a horse and with a bleeding shoulder, his options were limited. "I don't need love, just help," he said gruffly. Faith smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Then you'll get both from me." The statement caught Wyatt off guard, and he found himself momentarily speechless. Faith took advantage of his silence to guide him to her wagon. "Come on, Cowboy. Daylight's wasting, and we've got a fair piece to travel before dark." As they set off toward Cottonwood Creek, Wyatt kept glancing at the woman beside him. There was something about Faith Valentine that unsettled him, a quiet strength, an independence of spirit, and a kindness that seemed out of place in this harsh land. For the first time in years, he felt something stir within him, something he'd thought long dead. And that frightened him more than the Harmon gang ever could. Faith kept her eyes on the trail ahead, but her mind was on the man seated beside her. She'd heard stories about Wyatt Blackwell, former soldier, skilled gunfighter, wanted for a bank robbery in Billings. Some said he was innocent, framed by the real culprits. Others claimed he was as guilty as sin. All agreed he was dangerous, yet the man beside her didn't match those stories. His eyes held pain, yes, and wariness, but not the cold calculation of a hardened criminal. The way he tried to dissuade her from helping him spoke of concern for her safety rather than self-preservation. "You're staring," Wyatt said without looking at her. Faith quickly turned her attention back to the horses. "Just wondering what a man like you is doing in this part of the territory." "Not many travel these roads alone. I go where there's work," he replied tersely, "and the Harmon gang, they just happen to take a dislike to you." Wyatt shifted uncomfortably, partly from pain and partly from the directness of her questioning. "It's complicated. It usually is." Faith guided the wagon around a large rut in the road. "My pa used to say that a man running from something never stops long enough to find what he's running to." "Your pa sounds like a wise man." "He was." Faith's voice softened with memory. "Died defending our store from raiders 3 years ago." "I'm sorry," Wyatt said, and the genuine sympathy in his voice surprised her. They fell silent for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves. The sun was beginning to dip toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "We should reach Cottonwood by nightfall," Faith said, breaking the silence. "Dr. Wilson can tend to that shoulder properly. I told you, it's just a graze." But Wyatt's face was pale beneath his tan, and Faith noticed how he held his arm stiffly against his side. "I've seen enough wounds to know when one needs stitching," Faith countered. "Besides, if you're going to help me unload those crates of supplies, I need you with both arms working." Wyatt looked at her with grudging respect. "You're not easily put off, are you?" "Not when I know I'm right," Faith replied with a small smile. "And I usually am." "That's a dangerous claim in these parts," Wyatt said, but there was a hint of amusement in his voice. As they approached Cottonwood Creek, Faith could see that Wyatt was growing increasingly tense. His eyes scanned the cluster of buildings that made up the small town, assessing potential threats. "No need to worry," Faith assured him. "Cottonwood's a peaceful place. Sheriff Tanner keeps it that way." "That's what I'm afraid of," Wyatt muttered. Faith shot him a questioning look but decided not to press. Whatever Wyatt Blackwell was running from, he'd tell her in his own time if he stayed long enough. Cottonwood Creek was a modest settlement that had sprung up around a trading post some 20 years earlier. Now it boasted a main street with a general store, Faith's, a saloon, a small hotel, a blacksmith, and various other businesses necessary for frontier life. About 200 people called it home, with more scattered on surrounding ranches and farms. Faith guided the wagon to the back of her store, a 2-story building with the shop below and her living quarters above. "We're here," she announced. "Let's get you inside." Wyatt climbed down stiffly, his face tight with pain. Faith quickly moved to his side, offering support. Despite his earlier protests, he accepted her help into the store, his weight heavy against her shoulder. The Valentine General Store was well stocked, its shelves lined with everything from canned goods to tools, fabric to ammunition. A pot-bellied stove stood in one corner, and a counter with a cash register dominated the front of the space. At the back, a door led to a small storeroom and a staircase to the upper floor. Faith helped Wyatt to a chair near the stove. "Wait here, I'll fetch Dr. Wilson." "No doctor," Wyatt said firmly. "Just give me some bandages and whiskey, I'll manage." Faith planted her hands on her hips, fixing him with a determined stare. "Mr. Blackwell, I didn't drag you 10 miles to have you bleed to death in my store. You're seeing the doctor, and that's final." Before Wyatt could argue further, the bell above the store's door jingled, and an elderly man with spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard entered. "Faith, I thought I saw your wagon. How was the trip to?" He stopped short upon seeing Wyatt. "I see you brought back more than supplies this time." "Dr. Wilson, this is Wyatt Blackwell. He's been shot in the shoulder." The doctor moved forward, his demeanor instantly professional. "Let's have a look, son." Wyatt reluctantly allowed the doctor to examine his wound after Faith gave him a stern look that brooked no argument. Dr. Wilson clucked his tongue as he peeled back the blood-soaked shirt. "Clean through the flesh, thankfully. Missed the bone. You're lucky, Mr. Blackwell." He glanced at Faith. I'll need hot water, clean cloths, and my bag from the office." Faith nodded and moved to fetch the requested items. When she returned, Dr. Wilson had Wyatt's shirt off, revealing not only the bullet wound but a collection of scars that told their own stories of a hard life. "This will hurt," the doctor warned as he began cleaning the wound. Wyatt didn't flinch, though beads of sweat formed on his brow. Faith found herself admiring his stoicism even as she wondered what kind of life had taught him to endure such pain without complaint. Once the wound was clean, Dr. Wilson prepared a needle and thread. "Faith, perhaps some whiskey for our patient." Faith retrieved a bottle from behind the counter and poured a generous measure. Wyatt accepted it with a nod of thanks, downing it in one swallow before the doctor began stitching. By the time Dr. Wilson finished, night had fallen completely, and Faith had lit the lamps around the store. "Keep the wound clean," the doctor instructed as he packed up his supplies. "Change the bandage daily. No heavy lifting for at least a week." "I'll make sure he follows orders," Faith promised. Dr. Wilson gave her a knowing look. "I'm sure you will. Good night, Faith, Mr. Blackwell." With a tip of his hat, he departed, leaving Faith and Wyatt alone in the lamp-lit store. "You should rest," Faith said, breaking the silence. "There's a spare room upstairs you can use." Wyatt looked uncomfortable. "I should move on. With that shoulder, don't be ridiculous." Faith began closing up the store, pulling down blinds and locking the door. "Besides, you owe me help with those supplies, remember?" "I'm not sure staying here is a good idea." Faith paused in her tasks to face him directly. "Because of the Harmon gang, or because of something else?" Wyatt met her gaze steadily. "Both. I'm not the kind of man who brings peace to a place, Miss Valentine." "Faith," she corrected him. "And I'll be the judge of what kind of man you are." She gestured toward the back stairs. "Now, are you coming upstairs under your own power, or do I need to fetch some of the men from the saloon to carry you?" A reluctant smile tugged at the corner of Wyatt's mouth. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "Thank you," Faith replied with a grin. "Now come on. I've got stew warming on the stove, and I imagine you haven't eaten a proper meal in days." As they climbed the stairs to Faith's living quarters, Wyatt found himself wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Faith Valentine was unlike any woman he'd encountered, direct, confident, and utterly fearless. She'd faced down the Harmon gang without hesitation, tended to his wound without squeamishness, and now offered him shelter despite knowing nothing about him. Either she was the most trusting soul in the territory, or there was more to Faith Valentine than met the eye. Either way, Wyatt knew he should leave at first light. Staying would only bring danger to her door. Yet as he followed her into a cozy apartment smelling of stew and fresh baked bread, Wyatt found himself hoping morning would take its time in coming. The next morning, Wyatt woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, disorientation seized him, then the events of the previous day rushed back, along with the throbbing pain in his shoulder. He was in Faith Valentine's spare room above her general store in Cottonwood Creek. He rose gingerly, testing his injured shoulder. The doctor had done good work. The stitches held firm despite the discomfort. After washing with the basin and pitcher provided, Wyatt pulled on his shirt, now clean and mended. He noticed with surprise and made his way to the main living area. Faith stood at a small stove, cooking something that smelled deliciously like bacon. She turned at his entrance, her face brightening. "You're up. I was beginning to think you'd sleep through the day." "What time is it?" Wyatt asked, suddenly concerned. "Just past 8. The store opens at 9. Faith gestured to the small table set with plates and cups. "Sit. You need to eat." Wyatt hesitated but did as instructed. "You washed my shirt." "It needed it," Faith replied matter-of-factly, placing a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits before him. "Coffee." "Please," Wyatt nodded, surprised at how normal this felt, sharing breakfast with a woman he barely knew in a cozy apartment above a general store in a town where nobody knew him. "Or did they? Has word spread about me being here?" he asked as Faith poured coffee for them both. Faith sat across from him, her own plate modest compared to the generous portion she'd given him. Dr. Wilson isn't one to gossip, but in a town this size, secrets don't stay secret long. Why are you worried about the sheriff? Wyatt took a bite of the perfectly cooked eggs, buying time to consider his answer. I'm worried about bringing trouble to your door, he finally said, which was true enough, if not the whole truth. Faith studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. Because of the Harmon gang. Or because of whatever has you carrying a gun like it's part of your arm? Wyatt couldn't help but smile slightly at her directness. Both. Well, the Harmon gang rarely comes to town. Sheriff Tanner and our local men have made it clear they're not welcome. Faith broke a biscuit in half, dipping it in honey. As for the rest, I figure a man has a right to his secrets until he's ready to share them. That's unusually understanding for someone who just took in a stranger with a bullet wound. Faith's expression grew more serious. I've learned to judge people by their actions, not rumors or appearances. You could have shot at the Harmon gang yesterday, but you chose to hide instead. That tells me something. That I'm a coward, Wyatt asked wryly, that you're not eager to kill, even in self-defense. Faith held his gaze steadily. That's rare in these parts. Wyatt looked away first, uncomfortable with her assessment. He'd killed before more times than he cared to remember during the war, and after, but she was right that he no longer sought violence when it could be avoided. So, Faith continued, changing the subject, after breakfast, I could use help unloading those supplies. Dr. Wilson said no heavy lifting, but you can manage the lighter items, I expect. I can do more than that, Wyatt insisted, though his shoulder throbbed at the very thought. We'll see, Faith replied, clearly unconvinced. Then perhaps you might help mind the store while I make deliveries this afternoon. Most of my regular customers are respectable folk, but occasionally drifters or cowboys fresh off the trail come through. A male presence can be helpful. Wyatt realized she was offering him a job, temporary perhaps, but a job nonetheless. It had been months since he'd done honest work, subsisting instead on odd jobs and the occasional poker game. The prospect was more appealing than it should have been. I'm not looking to settle down, he warned her. Faith laughed, the sound light and genuine. I'm offering you work for a day or two, Mr. Blackwell, not a marriage proposal. Wyatt felt his face warm with embarrassment. Of course. I just meant I know what you meant, Faith interrupted, still smiling, and it's fine. You help me for as long as you're here, and we'll call it even for the doctoring and lodging. Fair, fair, Wyatt agreed, finishing his coffee. Though I still think you're taking a risk, trusting me in your store. Oh, I trust you with the store, Faith said, rising to clear the plates, but I'll be counting the cash box before and after just so we're clear. Wyatt laughed despite himself. Smart woman. I've had to be, Faith replied with a shrug, though something in her tone hinted at stories untold. Now, finish up. We've got work to do. The morning passed quickly as they worked together, unloading supplies and stocking shelves. Wyatt found that Faith ran her business with impressive efficiency. Everything had its place, and she knew exactly what was needed where. Despite her earlier concern about his shoulder, she didn't hesitate to put him to work, though she did ensure he handled only items he could manage one-handed. As 9 o'clock approached, Faith unlocked the front door and flipped the sign to open. Almost immediately, customers began to arrive, a mix of townspeople and ranchers from the surrounding area. Faith greeted each by name, inquiring after families and livestock with genuine interest. Wyatt hung back, uncomfortable with the curious looks thrown his way. He focused on organizing a shelf of canned goods, keeping his injured side away from prying eyes. But he couldn't help overhearing the whispered conversations. Who's the stranger? Faith Valentine took him in, they say. Heard he had trouble with the Harmon gang. Is that a gunshot wound? Eventually, an elderly woman approached him directly, peering at him over wire-rimmed spectacles. You're the man Faith brought back yesterday. It wasn't a question, but Wyatt nodded anyway. Yes, madam. She looked him up and down appraisingly. I'm Agatha Winters. I've known Faith since she was in pigtails. She's like a granddaughter to me. Wyatt sensed a warning coming. She's a fine woman, he offered neutrally. The finest, Mrs. Winters agreed emphatically. Lost her ma to fever when she was 12. Her pa raised her alone until those raiders killed him 3 years back. Girl's been running this store by herself ever since, never complaining, always helping others. She fixed Wyatt with a stern gaze. So you understand why folks around here are protective of her? I do, Wyatt said, meeting her eyes directly, and you should be, but I'm just passing through. Miss Valentine patched me up, that's all. Mrs. Winters didn't look convinced. Faith doesn't take in every stray that wanders by. She saw something in you worth saving. The old woman's expression softened slightly. Don't prove her wrong, young man. With that cryptic statement, she moved away to speak with Faith, leaving Wyatt pondering her words. What had Faith seen in him? A wounded man in need of help, certainly, but Mrs. Winters seemed to imply something more, something Wyatt himself couldn't see. The morning crowd eventually thinned, giving Wyatt a chance to catch his breath. Faith approached, carrying a ledger. You did well, she said. Sorry about the interrogation from Mrs. Winters. She means well. She cares about you, Wyatt replied. That's not a bad thing, Faith smiled warmly. No, it's not. I've been blessed with good people around me. She checked the clock on the wall. It's nearly noon. Would you mind watching the store while I prepare lunch? It shouldn't take long. I can manage, Wyatt assured her, though the prospect of dealing with customers alone made him uneasy. As if reading his mind, Faith added, most folks have gone home for midday meals. It should be quiet until later afternoon. True to her prediction, the store remained empty while Faith was upstairs. Wyatt took the opportunity to explore the space more thoroughly, noting the organization of goods, the quality of the merchandise, and the small touches that made the place distinctly. Faith's fresh flowers on the counter, handwritten signs with cheerful messages. A small bookshelf with volumes available for borrowing. He was examining a finely crafted hunting knife when the bell above the door jingled. Wyatt turned to find a tall, broad-shouldered man in a sheriff's uniform entering the store. The star pinned to his chest gleamed in the sunlight. Sheriff, Wyatt acknowledged cautiously, setting down the knife. You must be Blackwell, the lawman said, studying Wyatt with experienced eyes. I'm Sheriff Tanner. He approached the counter, his gait unhurried but purposeful. Heard you had some trouble with the Harmon gang yesterday. News travels fast. Small town, Sheriff Tanner replied with a shrug. Mind telling me what that was about? Before Wyatt could answer, Faith returned from upstairs, carrying a tray with sandwiches and lemonade. She paused upon seeing the sheriff, then continued forward with a welcoming smile. Sheriff Tanner, just in time for lunch. Will you join us? The sheriff's stern expression softened slightly. Thank you, Faith, but I can't stay. Just checking in on your guest here. Faith set the tray on the counter. Mr. Blackwell is helping me with the store while his shoulder heals. Dr. Wilson says he should rest for at least a week. Sheriff Tanner raised an eyebrow. A week, huh? Planning a long stay in Cottonwood, Blackwell? The question was loaded, and Wyatt knew it. Just until I can travel without reopening this wound, he replied carefully. The sheriff nodded slowly. Well, while you're in my town, I expect you to keep to the right side of the law. We're peaceful here, and I aim to keep it that way. Understood, Wyatt said. Sheriff Tanner tipped his hat to Faith. Miss Valentine, enjoy your lunch. With a last measuring look at Wyatt, he departed, leaving the store silent in his wake. Faith handed Wyatt a sandwich. Don't mind the sheriff. He's cautious with strangers, but he's a good man. He's right to be cautious, Wyatt said, accepting the food. A wounded drifter shows up in his town, he should ask questions. And you should answer them, Faith countered gently. The sheriff could help you, whatever trouble you're in. Wyatt took a bite of his sandwich to avoid responding immediately. When he did speak, his voice was low. Some trouble can't be fixed by a small town sheriff, no matter how well-intentioned. Faith studied him, her expression thoughtful. Is it that bad? Bad enough. Wyatt met her gaze directly. I'm wanted for a bank robbery I didn't commit. There's a $500 bounty on my head, dead or alive. He expected shock, perhaps fear. Instead, Faith nodded calmly, as if confirming a suspicion. I thought it might be something like that. The way you checked every exit when we entered town, how you keep your back to walls, your eyes always moving. Wyatt stared at her, surprised by her perception. You noticed all that. I notice most things, Faith replied with a small smile. So, if you didn't rob the bank, who did? The question was so direct, so lacking in doubt about his innocence, that Wyatt found himself answering without hesitation. The Harmon gang. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, walked into the bank just as they were leaving. The teller was dead and I had my gun drawn, perfect scapegoat. Have you tried clearing your name? Wyatt gave a bitter laugh. How? The only witnesses who could exonerate me are the gang themselves, and they're not exactly willing to confess. Besides, Jed Harmon has connections. His cousin is a deputy marshal in Billings. Faith frowned. That's why they're so determined to find you. You're the only one who can identify them. Among other reasons, Wyatt agreed grimly. Now do you understand why I shouldn't stay? They followed me here once, they could come back, and next time they might not be so easily scared off. Faith took a sip of lemonade, her expression thoughtful. Or next time they might face more than just me with a rifle. What do you mean? Cottonwood takes care of its own, Faith explained. If the town stands with you against the Harmon gang, they wouldn't stand a chance. Wyatt shook his head. I'm not one of your own. I'm a stranger with a price on his head. Why would the town risk itself for me? Faith reached across the counter to touch his hand lightly. Because I'd ask them to. Her eyes held his, steady and certain. And because it would be the right thing to do. The simple conviction in her voice struck Wyatt deeply. How long had it been since he'd encountered someone who believed so strongly in doing right, regardless of the cost? Faith Valentine was either the most naive woman he'd ever met or the bravest. Perhaps both. You barely know me, he reminded her. I know enough, Faith replied. She withdrew her hand and began tidying the lunch things. Eat your sandwich. We've got a busy afternoon ahead and I need you at full strength. The subject was closed for now, but Wyatt knew the conversation wasn't over. Faith Valentine had decided he was worth helping, and he suspected she wasn't one to change her mind easily. The thought should have alarmed him. Getting involved with others only complicated his situation, but instead, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. It was a dangerous feeling for a man on the run, but as he watched Faith move about her store with confident grace, Wyatt couldn't bring himself to extinguish it entirely. The afternoon passed in a flurry of activity. As Faith had mentioned, she needed to make deliveries around town, leaving Wyatt to mind the store. Despite his initial reservations, he found he had a knack for it. His natural wariness made him attentive to customers' needs. And years of reading people at poker tables served him well in gauging what they were really looking for. By the time Faith returned, Wyatt had not only managed the regular business, but had also sold an expensive hunting rifle to a rancher and convinced Mrs. Winters to try a new brand of coffee. You've been busy, Faith observed, noting the entries in the ledger. Just keeping things running, Wyatt replied modestly. And charming Mrs. Winters, apparently. She stopped me on the street to tell me you have good manners for a gunslinger. Faith's eyes twinkled with amusement. High praise from her. Wyatt couldn't help but smile. She's a formidable woman. That she is. Faith hung her shawl on a hook behind the counter. How's the shoulder? Better, Wyatt said, though in truth it was aching fiercely after the long day. Faith saw through the lie immediately. Let me check the bandage after we close. It's nearly time anyway. As she moved to lock the front door, a commotion outside caught their attention. Raised voices, the sound of horses approaching at speed. Faith peered out the window, her expression changing from curiosity to concern. What is it? Wyatt asked, hand instinctively moving toward his gun. Riders coming into town fast, 5 of them. Faith's voice was tight. And they look like trouble. Wyatt joined her at the window, careful to stay partially hidden behind the curtain. His heart sank as he recognized the lead rider. Jed Harmon. Faith turned to him, her face pale but determined. "They've come for you." "Yes." Wyatt checked his gun, fully loaded this time. "Faith, listen to me. I want you to go upstairs and stay there. Lock the door. Don't come out until this is over. And let you face them alone. Not a chance." Faith moved to the back of the store, returning with her Winchester rifle. "This is my store, my town. I'm not hiding." "This isn't your fight," Wyatt insisted. "It became my fight when I brought you here," Faith countered. "Besides, I'm a better shot than you think." Before Wyatt could argue further, the door to the store rattled violently. "Blackwell," Jed Harmon's voice boomed from outside. "We know you're in there. Come out now, and maybe we'll let the woman live." Faith's eyes widened at the threat, but she didn't falter, moving to a position behind the counter that gave her a clear shot at the door. "Go out the back," she whispered to Wyatt. "I'll keep them busy." Wyatt shook his head firmly. "I'm not leaving you to face them." He moved to stand beside her, his gun ready. "We do this together." The door rattled again, harder this time. "Last chance, Blackwell," Jed called. Wyatt took a deep breath. "Jed," he called back, "there are innocent people here. This is between you and me. Let's settle it man to man." A harsh laugh answered him. "Not a chance. You're worth more dead than alive to me now. Boss wants proof you can't testify." "Boss," Faith whispered. "His cousin, the deputy marshal," Wyatt explained quietly. "He must be worried I'll find a way to clear my name." The moment of relative calm shattered as the front window exploded inward, showering glass across the floor. Faith ducked instinctively, but Wyatt saw her eyes widen in horror as a lit object sailed through the broken window. "Fire bomb." He shouted, lunging forward to grab the makeshift explosive, a bottle filled with kerosene, its rag wick burning bright. With one fluid motion, he caught it and hurled it back through the window. A satisfying cry of alarm came from outside, followed by cursing. Wyatt grabbed Faith's arm. "We need to move. They'll try to burn us out." As if confirming his words, smoke began to curl under the door. They had set fire to the front porch. "The back way," Faith said, already moving, "through the storeroom." They hurried toward the rear of the store, but before they could reach the storeroom door, shots rang out. The Harmon gang was firing through the windows, forcing them to take cover behind shelves. "We'll be trapped if the fire spreads," Faith said, her voice remarkably steady despite the danger. Wyatt knew she was right. The wooden building would go up like tinder. "I need to draw them away from the store," he decided. "Give me your rifle. It's got better range than my revolver." "What are you planning?" Faith asked suspiciously. "I'll go out the back, circle around, and take them from behind. While they're focused on me, you get to safety." Faith shook her head emphatically. "Too dangerous. They'll kill you." "I'm already a dead man in their eyes," Wyatt replied grimly. "At least this way, you and the town have a chance." Before Faith could protest further, the front door crashed open, flames licking at its edges. Two of Harmon's men stormed in, guns drawn. Faith reacted instantly, firing a shot that caught one in the shoulder, sending him reeling back. Wyatt took down the second with a clean shot to the leg. The moment of advantage was brief. More shots came through the windows, one grazing Faith's arm and drawing a gasp of pain from her. The sight of her blood ignited something primal in Wyatt: rage, protectiveness, and a sudden, crystal-clear certainty that he could not let harm come to this woman who had risked everything for him. "We go together," he said, his decision made. "Out the back, then split up. I'll draw their fire, you get the sheriff." Faith nodded, pressing a handkerchief to her bleeding arm. "Be careful." They made it to the storeroom, the smoke now thick around them. Outside, they could hear Jed Harmon shouting orders to his remaining men. The back door opened onto an alley that ran behind the row of Main Street buildings. "Ready?" Wyatt asked, his hand on the door latch. Faith's answer was to cock her rifle. "Ready." They burst into the alley together, then immediately split in opposite directions as planned. Wyatt fired 2 shots into the air, ensuring Harmon's attention would focus on him, then darted between buildings, heading toward the livery stable where he knew horses would be available. Behind him, he heard shouting as Harmon spotted him. There he is, after him. Wyatt ran despite the pain in his shoulder, dodging between buildings and over fences. He reached the livery stable, quickly saddled a horse, and rode hard toward the edge of town, deliberately making himself visible. As he'd hoped, 3 riders gave chase, leaving only Jed himself and one other man behind hopefully manageable numbers for the sheriff and townspeople. What Wyatt hadn't counted on was Jed's cunning. Instead of following the others in pursuit, Jed had apparently deduced Wyatt's plan. As Wyatt circled back toward town by a roundabout route, intending to ambush his pursuers, he spotted Jed and his remaining man heading directly for the sheriff's office, where Faith would have gone for help. Heart pounding, Wyatt changed course, driving his horse at breakneck speed back toward the center of town. He arrived just in time to see Faith emerging from the sheriff's office with Sheriff Tanner and 2 deputies, all armed. Jed and his man were approaching from the opposite direction, guns drawn, Wyatt dismounted in one fluid motion, Winchester in hand. "Jed," he called out loud enough for all to hear. "It's over, the law's involved now." Jed Harmon turned, his face contorted with rage when he saw Wyatt. "You just don't die easy, do you, Blackwell?" "Never have," Wyatt replied, stepping forward to place himself between Jed and Faith. "Call off your men, Jed, you've lost." "Have I?" Jed sneered. "Looks to me like I've got you exactly where I want you, in the open, with nowhere to hide. And once you're dead, who's going to contradict my story about the Billings Bank? Your pretty shopkeeper." He raised his gun, aiming directly at Wyatt. Sheriff Tanner stepped forward, his own weapon trained on Jed. "Lower your weapon, Harmon. You're outnumbered and in my jurisdiction." "Stay out of this, Sheriff," Jed warned. "This is federal business. This man's a wanted fugitive." "So I've heard," Sheriff Tanner replied evenly. "But from what Miss Valentine tells me, there might be more to that story, and in my town, everyone gets a fair hearing." Jed's eyes narrowed. "Your town won't mean much when my cousin, Deputy Marshal Harmon, hears you're harboring a fugitive." To Wyatt's surprise, Sheriff Tanner smiled. "Funny you should mention Marshal Harmon. I sent a telegram to the federal marshal's office in Helena yesterday, inquiring about Wyatt Blackwell's case. Got a most interesting reply this morning." This revelation caught everyone by surprise, including Wyatt. The sheriff continued, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Seems Deputy Marshal Harmon has been under investigation for some time. Too many fugitives dying before they could testify, too many bandits operating freely in his territory." He looked directly at Jed, "and too many connections to certain outlaw gangs." Jed's face drained of color. "You're lying." "The federal marshal himself is on his way to Billings as we speak," Sheriff Tanner replied. "Now, I suggest you drop those weapons before things get worse for you." For a moment, the tableau held Jed and his man with guns raised, facing the sheriff, his deputies, Wyatt and Faith, all armed and ready. Then Jed made his decision, swinging his gun toward Faith with deadly intent. Wyatt moved without thinking, diving forward as Jed's finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the street as Wyatt collided with Faith, knocking her to the ground. Pain bloomed in his side. Jed's bullet had found him instead of its intended target. More shots rang out as the sheriff and his deputies returned fire. Through a haze of pain, Wyatt saw Jed fall, clutching his chest. The remaining gang member threw down his weapon in surrender. Faith's face swam into view above him, her expression frantic. "Wyatt, oh God, you're hit." "Worth it," Wyatt managed, his voice strained. "You're safe." The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Faith's tear-streaked face, her lips forming words he couldn't hear. Wyatt drifted in and out of consciousness, catching fragments of reality being carried somewhere, Faith's voice arguing with someone, the sting of antiseptic on his wound, the cool touch of a damp cloth on his forehead. Time lost meaning, stretching and compressing in strange ways. When he finally woke fully, the first thing he saw was Faith, asleep in a chair beside his bed. Her hand rested near his, as if she had been holding it before exhaustion claimed her. Sunlight streamed through a window, suggesting it was morning, though of which day he couldn't tell. The movement of his hand as he reached for hers woke Faith immediately. Her eyes flew open, and when she saw him conscious, her face transformed with relief. "You're awake," she breathed, quickly pouring water from a pitcher on the bedside table. "Here, drink this." Wyatt accepted the water gratefully, his throat parched. "How long?" he rasped after drinking. 3 days, Faith replied, her voice thick with emotion. "The doctor wasn't sure you'd." She trailed off, unable to finish. Wyatt squeezed her hand weakly. "Takes more than Jed Harmon to kill me." Faith's laugh was watery. "Apparently so, though you gave it your best effort, jumping in front of a bullet like that." Memory flooded back, Jed aiming at Faith, the desperate lunge, the searing pain. "He was going to shoot you," Wyatt said simply, as if that explained everything. In his mind it did. Faith's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Why would you do that? Risk your life for me?" Wyatt held her gaze steadily. "Because you were worth saving." The words, her own, spoken back to her, hit Faith visibly. A single tear escaped, trailing down her cheek. She brushed it away quickly. "Well, next time try to save me without getting yourself shot." "Next time," Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "Planning on getting into more trouble, Miss Valentine, with you around, seems likely." Faith's smile was tremulous but genuine. "Speaking of trouble, there have been some developments while you were unconscious." "What kind of developments?" Wyatt asked warily. Faith's expression brightened. "Good ones, for a change. The federal marshal arrived from Helena yesterday. He's been interviewing the surviving members of the Harmon gang. Turns out they're quite talkative with their leader dead and facing hanging themselves." Hope stirred in Wyatt's chest. "They've confessed to the bank robbery and several other crimes," Faith confirmed. "The marshal has formally cleared your name, Wyatt. The bounty's been withdrawn." The news was so unexpected, so complete in its resolution of the problems that had haunted him for months, that Wyatt couldn't immediately process it. "I'm free?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Faith nodded, her smile radiant now. "Completely. In fact, the marshal mentioned there might be a reward for helping bring down the Harmon gang. You could have a fresh start anywhere you want." Anywhere he wanted. The possibilities were suddenly endless and overwhelming. For so long, Wyatt had lived day to day, looking over his shoulder, focused only on survival. The concept of a future of choices, of putting down roots somewhere, was almost foreign to him now. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't have to decide anything now," Faith assured him. "Dr. Wilson says you need at least another week of bed rest anyway." She hesitated, then added softly, "And you're welcome to stay here as long as you need. The spare room is yours." Wyatt studied her face, trying to understand what lay behind the offer. Compassion, certainly. Faith seemed to have an endless supply of that, but there was something more in her eyes, something that mirrored the unexpected feelings growing within him. "Why are you doing all this for me?" he asked, needing to hear her answer. Faith considered the question seriously. At first, it was simple decency, helping someone in need. Then it became about justice, clearing your name. But now... She met his gaze directly. "Now it's because I care about you, Wyatt, more than I expected to, more than is probably wise." The honesty of her answer humbled him. "I'm not sure I deserve that." "That's not for you to decide," Faith replied with a hint of her usual determination. "Besides, you took a bullet for me. I'd say that earns you some consideration." Wyatt couldn't help but smile at her logic. "I suppose it does." His expression sobered. "But Faith, you should know I'm not good at staying in one place, never have been, and I'm definitely not good at letting people get close." "I've noticed," Faith said dryly, "and yet here we are." "Here we are," Wyatt agreed softly. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Faith rose to answer it, revealing Sheriff Tanner. "Miss Valentine," the sheriff greeted her, then looked past to Wyatt. "Blackwell, good to see you among the living." "Thanks to your timely intervention," Wyatt acknowledged. Sheriff Tanner entered the room, removing his hat. "Just doing my job." "Speaking of which, I have something for you." He pulled an envelope from his vest pocket. From Marshal Hastings, your formal exoneration and information about the reward. Wyatt accepted the envelope with a nod of thanks. I owe you, Sheriff. You owe Faith, Sheriff Tanner corrected. She's the one who convinced me to telegraph Helena about your case. He turned to Faith with a respectful nod. The marshal asked me to tell you the fire damage to your store will be covered by the federal government, as it occurred during the apprehension of known criminals. Faith's relief was evident. Thank you, Sheriff. That's welcome news. After the sheriff departed, Wyatt opened the envelope with unsteady hands. Inside was indeed a formal document clearing him of all charges related to the Billings bank robbery, along with a note indicating a reward of $300 would be paid to him upon his recovery. $300, Wyatt mused. That's a decent stake. Enough to go anywhere, do anything, Faith agreed, though Wyatt thought he detected a hint of sadness in her voice. He looked up from the papers to find her watching him, her expression carefully neutral. What would you do, Faith, if you had $300 and could go anywhere? The question seemed to surprise her. I've never really thought about it. The store is my home, my livelihood. I belong here. You've never wanted to see what else is out there. San Francisco, New York, Wyatt pressed. Faith considered this. I suppose I've dreamed of it sometimes. Especially after Pa died, when the store felt more like a burden than a blessing. She shrugged. But dreams are one thing, reality another. I have responsibilities here. Wyatt nodded, understanding perfectly. Responsibilities, connections, roots, they anchored a person to a place for better or worse. He had spent years avoiding such ties, convinced they would only bring pain when inevitably severed. Yet here was Faith, bound to Cottonwood Creek by choice as much as circumstance, and stronger for it. She had built something here, not just a business, but a place in the community, relationships that sustained her through tragedy and hardship. For the first time, Wyatt found himself envying that sense of belonging. And more surprisingly, wondering if he might find it for himself here with her. What if, he began cautiously, I decided to stay in Cottonwood for a while? Faith's eyes widened slightly. You'd be welcome, of course, but I thought that I'd leave as soon as I could ride, Wyatt finished for her. Normally, you'd be right, but things are different now. Because your name's been cleared, Faith asked. Because of you, Wyatt answered honestly. You trusted me when you had no reason to. You fought for me when others wouldn't. You saw something in me that I'd forgotten was there. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle. I'm not promising forever, Faith. I don't know if I can, but I'd like to see where this leads if you're willing. Faith's fingers tightened around his. I believe I told you once that you'd get both help and love from me, she reminded him, a smile spreading across her face. I stand by that offer. Wyatt's heart lightened at her words. Then I accept, Miss Valentine, both parts. The following weeks passed in a blur of recovery and rebuilding. The damage to Faith's store proved less extensive than feared. The fire had been contained to the front portion of the building, leaving the storeroom and living quarters largely intact. With the promised government funds and help from the townspeople, repairs began immediately. Wyatt, once strong enough to leave his bed, threw himself into the reconstruction efforts, despite Dr. Wilson's continued warnings about overexertion. There was something deeply satisfying about working alongside the men of Cottonwood, many of whom had initially viewed him with suspicion, but now accepted him as one of their own. As his strength returned, Wyatt found himself thinking more concretely about his future. The reward money remained untouched, a symbol of possibilities still being considered. Faith never pressed him about his plans, but he could see the question in her eyes sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking. One evening, as they sat on the newly rebuilt porch of the store watching the sunset, Wyatt finally broached the subject that had been on his mind. I've been thinking about investing the reward money, he said casually, gauging Faith's reaction. Oh. Faith kept her tone neutral, though Wyatt noticed how she tensed slightly. In what sort of investment? A business partnership? Wyatt turned to face her directly. With you, if you'd be interested. Faith's expression shifted from careful neutrality to surprise. A partnership in the store. Unless you'd rather I stay out of it, Wyatt amended quickly. I know it's your father's legacy. No, it's not that, Faith assured him. I'm just surprised. Are you sure that's what you want, to be a shopkeeper in a small town like Cottonwood? Wyatt considered her question seriously. 6 months ago, no, but now. He gestured toward the town around them, the quiet streets, the distant mountains painted gold by the setting sun. This place has grown on me, or maybe you have. Faith smiled, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Is that your way of saying you're staying? It's my way of saying I want to build something here, Wyatt replied. With you, the store is just the beginning. Understanding dawned in Faith's eyes. Wyatt Blackwell, are you proposing a business arrangement or something more? Both, I think. Wyatt took her hand, his heart racing despite his outwardly calm demeanor. I'm not good with words, Faith, I never have been, but these weeks with you, they've shown me what I've been missing all these years running from place to place. And what's that? Faith asked softly. A home, Wyatt answered simply. Someone to come home to. Faith's eyes shimmered with emotion. And you think you could find that here, with me? I already have, Wyatt assured her. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small, simple gold band. I got this from Mrs. Wilson, the doctor's wife. She helped me choose it. He held it out, suddenly nervous. Faith Valentine, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Faith looked at the ring, then back to Wyatt's face, her expression unreadable for a heart-stopping moment. Then, slowly, she smiled, that same confident, determined smile she'd worn when she first found him wounded and desperate on the plains. I told you that day that you'd get both help and love from me, she said, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. I meant it then, and I mean it now. Is that a yes? Wyatt asked, hardly daring to believe. Faith's answer was to take the ring and slip it onto her finger. It's a yes, Wyatt Blackwell. Yes to the partnership, yes to building something together, and yes to becoming your wife. Wyatt pulled her close, his heart fuller than he'd ever thought possible. As their lips met in a tender kiss, he marveled at how his life had changed in mere weeks, from hunted outlaw to respected townsman, from solitary wanderer to a man with connections, responsibilities, and love. All because a brave, stubborn woman had offered help to a wounded stranger, and in doing so, had healed more than just his physical wounds. 6 months later, as summer ripened toward autumn, the newly christened Valentine and Blackwell General Store hosted a celebration. Not only was it the grand reopening of the fully restored and expanded building, but it also marked the wedding of its proprietors. The entire town turned out for the occasion. The ceremony itself was simple, held in the small church with Reverend Thomas officiating. Faith wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Winters had helped her select on a special trip to Helena, while Wyatt, at Faith's insistence, donned a new suit rather than his usual practical attire. Sheriff Tanner served as Wyatt's best man, a development that would have seemed impossible months earlier, but now felt entirely natural. Mrs. Winters, who had finally decided Wyatt was acceptable for her surrogate granddaughter, stood proudly with Faith. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to the store, where tables laden with food and drink filled the newly expanded space. Wyatt and Faith moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes with evident happiness. As evening approached, Dr. Wilson called for attention, raising his glass in a toast. To Faith and Wyatt, he proclaimed, may your partnership in business and in life bring you the happiness you both deserve. To Faith and Wyatt, the crowd echoed, glasses raised. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Wyatt drew Faith away to a quiet corner of the porch. The same porch where, half a year earlier, he had asked her to marry him. Happy, Mrs. Blackwell? He asked, still marveling at the sound of her new name. Very, Faith assured him, leaning into his embrace. And you, any regrets about settling down in Cottonwood? Wyatt looked out over the town, their town bathed in the golden light of sunset. Not a single one, he answered truthfully. Though I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if you hadn't found me that day. I think I was meant to find you, Faith said with conviction. Just as you were meant to stay. Wyatt smiled, remembering his words on that fateful day. I told you I didn't need love, just help. And I told you you'd get both from me. Faith completed the memory, her eyes sparkling. The wisest woman I've ever known, Wyatt acknowledged, pulling her closer. I thank God every day that you didn't listen when I tried to send you away. I never was good at taking orders, Faith replied with a grin. Especially from stubborn cowboys who don't know what's good for them. Lucky for me, Wyatt murmured, bending to kiss her softly. As they stood together watching the sun set on their wedding day, Wyatt reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From a wounded fugitive with no future to a man with a home, a business, and a wife he adored. All because Faith Valentine had seen something in him worth saving, worth fighting for. In the years to come, their partnership would face challenges, harsh winters that tested the town's resilience, economic difficulties, as the railroad bypassed Cottonwood in favor of larger settlements. Even the return of one of the surviving Harmon gang members seeking revenge. But through it all, Faith and Wyatt faced each trial together, their bond growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. The store thrived under their joint management, expanding to meet the growing needs of the community. When Faith gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Hope, the celebration rivaled their wedding for joyous enthusiasm. 2 years later, a son joined the family, named Thomas after Faith's father. Wyatt never did fully lose his wariness, his habit of scanning rooms for exits or keeping his back to walls. But over time, these instincts shifted from self-preservation to protection of his family and community. The skills that had kept him alive as a fugitive served him well as a family man and business owner in a frontier town where dangers still lurked. Faith, for her part, never lost her determination or her belief in doing what was right regardless of difficulty. When a group of settlers faced discrimination from some of the townsfolk, it was Faith who organized support for them. When a particularly harsh winter threatened the livelihood of surrounding ranchers, it was Faith and Wyatt who extended credit at the store, ensuring families could eat until spring brought relief. Together, they built not just a business but a legacy, one founded on the simple principle that had brought them together. Everyone deserves help when they need it, and sometimes that help comes with love attached. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the store locked up for the night, Faith and Wyatt would often sit on their porch, hands intertwined, watching the stars emerge above the mountains. In those peaceful moments, Wyatt would remember the wounded, distrustful man he had been and marvel at the transformation wrought by Faith's stubborn compassion. I still don't deserve you, he would sometimes tell her. And Faith, with the same confident smile that had captivated him from the beginning, would reply, That's not for you to decide, Wyatt Blackwell. I chose you, and I choose you still, every day. In a wild land where survival often depended on hardness and isolation, Faith and Wyatt Blackwell stood as living proof that vulnerability, trust, and love could build something far stronger than walls or weapons ever could. Their story became part of Cottonwood Creek's lore, passed down through generations, the tale of a wounded cowboy who claimed he didn't need love, and the remarkable woman who gave it to him anyway. And in the end, that love transformed not just 2 lives, but an entire community, creating a legacy that would endure long after the Wild West had faded into history and legend.